Okay, there you go. So when you're looking to begin your doctoral journey, there are as many ways up the mountain as there are people who go get their doctorate. So your journey is individually your own. It won't be the same as anyone else's, but having a made up mind can make it more difficult, because then you have to go backtrack to prove that your subject is something that needs to be studied, as opposed to not starting from scratch, but looking at other people's recommendations and then just taking that study further. Let me explain and show you a little bit more of what I mean. So when we look at finding a research topic, we look for gap analysis, or we're going to see where there are gaps still. It's like inventing, if I go back to heart surgery, we don't want to reinvent heart surgery. That would be a real waste of time. Instead, you experience and you go to the residency, you see what the heart surgeons are doing, and then you might add to a surgery or tweak a technique a little bit. That's kind of what I'm talking about. So what you're going to be doing is we're going to be looking over an abstract, see if it sounds interesting. What was the purpose of the study and the questions asked? And then what does skipping all the way down to chapter 5, what does it say is suggested for further research? I have had students who've actually found more than one study, maybe 2 studies or 3 studies, and they've actually gotten permission from all 3 authors, and then put those questions all together to create something that really encompassed what they wanted to study and add to. Again, there's a lot to this, but I'm going to model it for you. So I have a whole video on our dissertation writing research center that talks about scholarly writing and finding the gap, but I'm going to go ahead and do it with you and walk through it, but I'm going to need a volunteer. So the first thing I want to show you is, when you are here in your Blackboard, if you go to the institution page, you can access the library, and then we're going to come back to this for the prospectus. But when you're in the library, you have your library, you have databases, and as Laura was also kind enough to share with you, when you get to D, there's one called Dissertation and Thesis Global. I'm already here, and so I need a volunteer. Who's somebody who'd be willing to share with me a topic that they're interested in? Anybody? Somebody share? Nobody?
Work-life balance is one that was suggested in the chat.
Okay. Can somebody come online who wants that? Just unmute for me.
That's me.
Who's me?
Trey Schwarzkopf.
Trey, perfect. Okay, Trey. So work-life balance, can you give me a little bit more about it? Just managing that from the employee perspective or from the manager perspective, leadership? What are you thinking?
I was looking at in the education industry, the work-life balance and how it relates to retention, or it was retention, job performance with a focus on single parent teachers, but I think it's a little bit too broad. So I'm in the process of revising it, but the more I talk and the more you guys give us advice to relate it to business aspect, it might have to come from the administrator's side, because
let me go this way. Let me put in workforce, work-life balance, and employee. How about that? Okay, so here's some other things that you want to do. Because it is going to be potentially a survey or a set of questions that I want to ask permission to use or to take the study that much further. I do not want to go, really honestly, I want to start with the last 2 years first, because if I go any further back, I might run the risk of not having any resources or other things that they can steer me down paths for that are as useful. So I really start with the last 2 years. And then I do not want to do anything other than down here, doctoral dissertation. I don't want master's thesis. I want a doctoral dissertation. And then I'm just going to hit search and see what comes up. Okay, they're saying that they need a new session. I've been on too long. That's funny. So I'm gonna go here. I signed on earlier. Let's try this again. So I did work life, workforce, work life balance, and then I did employee. And then I want to make sure that's full text, last 2 years, and then doctoral dissertation. Let's see what happens. Okay, so a lot came up. Sometimes if you have to, you might move it out further for the date, but we had 6,595 results. So we have a lot going on here. So you can see right away, moderating the effect of job satisfaction. Here is the Great Balancing Act for women during COVID-19. Here is as an organizational strategy. This is a qualitative study. And these are all very current. They're putting the most current first. So do any of these look interesting to you? You want to try the organizational strategy one?
Sure.
Okay, so then we're going to click on it. We are going to take a look. I'm going to go to full text PDF. And let me go ahead and make this a little bit bigger. And then I'm just going to scroll down and look at the abstract. So I take a look at it. I know it's a qualitative study. So if I'm not interested in qualitative at all, I would want to move on. Or if qualitative seems interesting to me, then I'm going to go ahead and look at inquiring into explored employees' perspectives on strategic organizational work-life balance, initiatives to create competitive advantage and fostering retention, which is something that you mentioned. Does that seem interesting?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and go down. Chapter 1 is really a great overview. If you do a great job on your perspectives, as I'm going to mention later, you really have a lot of work already done for chapter 1. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to take a look at the research question. How do employees experience their organizational strategic initiatives aimed at improving work-life balance to create competitive advantage? So they're obviously looking at it from the organizational perspective. Their format is a little bit different than ours, but that's okay. Still interested?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm actually going to go all the way to chapter 5. And the reason why I want to go to chapter 5 is most institutions require students in their doctoral study to provide recommendations for further or future research. So I'm not even going to bother with the summary of the results yet. I want to see if there's something I can take further and take a look at the questions or what was utilized in their appendix, probably appendix B. So as I scroll down here, and you can notice I can get through this pretty quickly. I mean, I have only spent a few minutes looking at this study. So there's their implication. So here's recommendations for further research. This is where we're adding on to the heart surgery instead of reinventing, right? Adding on, making the wheel better instead of reinventing the wheel, if you will. So there are several recommendations that this author recommends. She feels like the pool for her participants was only those acquainted with the researcher's colleagues. So a more liberal criteria with having more people participate would be a better way to go. That would mean like a public link shared on social media or something like that to make it a much more broad study. They are looking at a quantitative study would be actually a great way to go. And then a longitudinal case study where you could follow an organization. So there's some ways that you could add to this. Probably the easiest would be making a broader sweep of this person's study, right? That would be a very fast way to do this. So usually you come down and they have to take their, it's required that they put in their questions, but I'm not seeing this here. So this is a different type of study. So then I can go all the way to the top and I can take a look at the questions that were utilized in the study. And then I can decide for myself if this is something that I would want to go get permission to use and to take further. So I can go ahead. It's odd that they're not at the end, isn't it, Dr. Burchell? The questions?
The, usually it's in the interview protocol at the very end in the
Yeah,
appendix,
it's not. Mm-mm.
but this is a different school, so they may
Yeah.
not require that like we do.
Here we go. Let's try this. Nope, that's just the research questions. So I would have to hunt further. I don't really want to take up time now, but you can kind of get a feel for the study. Trey, does that make sense to you? Then when
Yes.
you look at their questions, we can't change the questions. That's
And-
something that is important for me to share with you. If you get permission, and let's say you love this study and you love the questions that were asked, and you want to get permission to use the questions and take their future recommendations, you have support that there is a gap that you need, that this study needs more research by creating a broader participant base. So you have the support for the gap. You can see that the gap is there. And if you do get permission for the questions, just know that you can't change them. You could, with a literature review, add on a couple of open-ended questions possibly, and justify that by the literature review that you've conducted. But for the most part, you can add a little bit of open-ended question to get a little bit more information, but we can't change the published questions, because that's part of what makes them valid or reliable, is that they were utilized in a published setting for a study. Does that make sense?
Yes. But I guess my question would be, do we have to pick a completed approved dissertation to base that information off of, or can it be a research study that's just published, within an article that had questions and recommendations for future study, or does it have to, does the basis
Typically, that's a great question. Excuse me. Typically, if you have an article that has research, that has results, it comes from a doctoral study. So you would just take that article and go back researching down their references to where the actual doctoral dissertation was. Typically, if it's a study that's done outside of that, I think that you should just be careful. You really need to work with your chair to make sure that that study is not something that was done ad hoc or improperly. There's a lot more to it when it's not a dissertation, because it hasn't passed through IRB. We don't know, and we need it to make sure that it's passed through IRB, especially if you're getting permission for questions to utilize, or you're looking at variables. I would be very, very careful not to pull something from an actual doctorate study, because it has to pass through IRB. And that's really, I think if you do just utilize an article, you can utilize an article for your lit review, you can utilize an article in your prospectus, as we're going to cover, but you really need to be careful not to, I think it's safer to pull from a doctoral study. But if you find an article that traces you back to a doctoral study, then you can go backwards and find the doctoral study. Does that make sense? IRB is the International Review Board process that every dissertation must go through in order to be to move forward into data collection. And it is something that you will also conduct. You will complete 15 mini courses to become certified, so that you can submit for your IRB approval. But somebody else is going to get into that. So anyway, Trey, does that kind of help you? Thank you for being willing to be part of the process.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. One more person. Anybody else? We're just going to do one more quick one. Is there anybody else who would like to just get a brief overview of a study?
Yeah, I've found a little bit of a unique topic, and I'm curious about the presence of like faith or spiritualism in leadership and the impact on teams.
Let's try this and see. Again, remember, we want to do the last 2 years, and I'm going to do this one a little bit quicker just because we spent a lot of time on the other one, but I want to make sure that I at least try and help a couple of you to kind of get a feel. All right, so here we have, you can see, because I'm in dissertations, you can see that there are definitely some So here's assessing factors influencing faculty's attitudes towards shared governance and faith-based institutions. This is self-differentiated leadership in pastoral settings.
Yeah, you
I'm
might
really
want to
seeing-
add
really do-
business or something to it.
Yeah, I really do
So
think
you
I
don't-
have to,
Yeah.
because I'm
Well, for
getting
the
more of a
driver-
faith-based.
Yeah. It's comforting to see that your results have been as interesting as mine have as I look into this topic. And I've kind of chased it upstream to leadership style being maybe something, but
Yeah, that's what I'm definitely seeing too. You might need to go into things like this to leadership effectiveness. Also, servant leadership is an area where you might find some faith-based leadership. But I would say, that it depends on how far you want to go. So I think that you might need to really narrow your, depending on what you're looking for, you might need to narrow it down a little bit more, and your chair can help you, or when you're in the pre mentorship phase. So it's interesting, this one keeps coming up to increase employee engagement. So you might see why that's coming up with faith-based. So I'm seeing this come up, and and there's the servant leadership, which I thought would come up with too as well. So I would say pursuing one of these. Now, this is a faith-based organization, but it's still an organization. But this one has come up a couple of times. So I would say when you get to something like this, just read the abstract first. See if it takes you down the path that you want to go. If it doesn't at all, just walk away back to results and then keep searching. But I would say for you, we probably, I don't have the time today, but I know that your chair can help you. You might need to hone in a little bit more, maybe with some articles to help you get into that, but I think you'll find it.
awesome.
And can I make a suggestion too, that when you talk about over here where it says anywhere, that perhaps you narrow that down a little bit as well,
Yeah.
like to
that's
the
great.
title or to the abstract or something, rather than just the word faith-based anywhere.
Mhm. If I do
So
that,
that might help as well.
this is interesting. This one came up in the career of fire department officers. Now you want to stay with business, but I definitely think that you might have more as you hone in. I think that's going to help you with this one.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. So anyway, what you'll do is you'll look for those gaps, and that is where this takes me here to your prospectus. So once you find some gaps, I definitely suggest that you reach out to the authors. I mean, it doesn't hurt to have permission if you feel like it's something that you really love. The prospectus is what you will start with. I suggest that you look at the template in the Dissertation Writing and Research Center. So here, and once you're in the DST courses, you're automatically enrolled in this course. And if you scroll down to the left, you can see that we have prospectus supports. And as you go here, you will be able to download the template and the instructional guide. The instructional guide is great because it takes you through every single portion of the prospectus. And the prospectus itself is a template that you can type in. So that's really nice because you can just come down and notice how everything is proposed. It isn't set in stone. It's just something that you can fill out, but that's how you access the template, is through the Dissertation Writing and Research Center, right there on the side under prospectus support, and then you will have it. What you want to do is you want to make sure that don't worry about the title at first. I think the first thing to start with is looking for those gap doctoral studies like we just shared and other really strong peer-reviewed resources. to get those strong sources, you'll need to sift through at least 15 to 20 of them, because you really want to look at them to see which ones are stronger. You want really strong articles here. When you are doing your articles, make sure that you're thorough. I want to say that 3 to 5 sentences is not a thorough summary. You want to include research background, theories, the designs, the findings, the future recommendations. Clearly show how this source supports your proposed study that you found. That's why starting with the gap studies is so helpful, because then you have a direction for your other articles. You want to think of this as like a mini literature review, because these will probably become a basis for some of your literature review topics. And this is why you want to start with your gap studies, because a really great thing is if you find really great gap studies, it's like a beautiful wheel, because their reference list, especially if it's current in the last 2 years, are articles that you can kind of peruse through their titles and see which ones you want to link on. And because APA 7 requires the DOI link, you just click on the research link and there you go, you're off and running. So it really gives you a direction to help you save time. And that's always a nice thing with a doctorate. If you make sure that you work your way through the articles, the topics should cover the main topics of your proposed study, and they justify your gap and your problem, you're really on your way. Are there any questions so far?
I have one question.
Sure.
Because there's several professors or doctors that keep referring back, just make sure it's business related, make sure it's business related, because we're getting a DBA.
Very true.
But I think I need someone to then narrowly, specifically define what's going to be considered business, because I was looking at the education industry as a business, because they have the model, they have
It depends on if you're in the, I totally get your question, Trey. It depends on if you're in the public setting or in the private setting. There are education sectors that are in the private setting and definitely for profit. There are, though, public school settings that would argue that they are not a business, they are a state service like the fire or the police. So I would think that you would need to define that, because you are in a business school getting a DBA, you need to really look at the for-profit industry.
Okay, thank you.
Does that help?
Yes.
Yeah, that's where I would focus it, is just look for the for-profit side. If you want to stay in education, just look for the for-profit side. Because
Okay.
that they are running it like a business.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does, but I would think some public schools are as well, because because of the decisions and the
Yeah, but they would
money
argue, they would argue that they're not. And
Right.
and because they are a state service.
Okay, gotcha.
And they don't have the right, like a for-profit business. They don't have the same tax benefits. They don't have the same, there's a lot of differences.
Okay,
Unless they're a public charter that's pulling their ADA through a public system. If they are a for-profit private school, they are running it like a business.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, as opposed to public. Where public systems and public charters get their money through ADA, average daily attendance, and they are funded by the government. They still need to watch their budgets, but they're definitely funded differently. Okay, so any other questions? These are great questions. Any other questions? I love this back and forth, go for it. So anyway, let me go ahead and move on here. So this is your summary. You want to make sure after summarizing that you do not copy and paste, that you paraphrase and summarize the articles, support claims with citations, avoid inserting opinions or subjective statements. You want just the facts, Jack. You do not want to say, I think it will make a difference. You want to say it has a possibility of providing insight, etc. But you do not want to use subjective statements. Your proposed title, you want to just try and keep it down to 12 words or less, and then you will have a background summary of 1 to 2 paragraphs. You're then going to look at the gap, which we've already discussed, and then your problem and purpose statement. I've shared with you, and you're going to get a copy of all of this at the end of the time today. I've shared with you the qualitative example and the quantitative example here so that you can look them up. And you can see that the problem mirrors the purpose in each one, so that you are making sure that your problem and your purpose and your gap all flow perfectly together. And then you'll do the same with your research questions. Your theoretical foundations are the support, if you will. Consider it like the framework. There's a great article here if you want to check that out. But your theoretical foundations are just that, the foundations that frame and support your research. For instance, if you are looking at psychology literature, looking for sociological literature, you might use the social learning theory. So that's just where the theoretical foundation comes in, and you want 3 paragraphs for this. The really cool thing is when you look at your gap studies, you might find some of the theories that they use. Let's say you found a study that you love the questions that they're asking, you definitely want to get permission, you love the future recommendation, that's where you want to take your study. Take a look at their theories. You don't need to reinvent that either. Check out their theories, see if you want to use those, or maybe see if that gives you a spin-off into other theories. That there's so many theories out there. So see if that just gives you a good direction. Then you're on to your research questions or your hypothesis. I've illustrated a qualitative that matches its problem and purpose, and a quantitative that matches its problem and purpose. Remember that you want to have your questions mirror your problem and purpose statement so that they're all reflective of each other. Again, this is something that your chair will also help you with and double check to make sure, but I think I want to provide all this on a slide so that you could take time, look back at it as you need to. And then finally, the application to business administration. How does this relate to business? And a couple paragraphs on what difference can the potential gained insight from your study make in the business world? How could it change or broaden the business perspective or even add to business theory? So you're just going to some of the significance. This is all adjustable because it's just your prospectus, but it is a great start towards exploring these. And as you do your chapter 2, you might find more articles that give you insight here, but the prospectus is a fantastic start to your chapter 1. Move myself here. And then finally, just enjoy the process. Finding the gap certainly helps to aim you in a specific direction. It helps you with speeding up the process, not having to reinvent the wheel and or spend a year getting the validity and reliability completed for your own set of questions. And this well-written prospectus will definitely provide a foundation to help you as you expand. Any questions? No? Well, congratulations to all of you on walking through this journey. It's a fantastic one. And I think that you're all going to do fantastic. I love CSU and I love our process. We keep making it better and better. And I look forward to maybe working with some of you in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Whitaker. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're running a little bit early, and I'm not seeing Dr. Mary D yet. So
Does anybody want me to do more?
Yeah,
It's up
if you
to you.
have questions, that would be awesome.
I do too.
I can tell you from my own experience, because I got my doctorate 10 years ago, 11 years ago, something like that. I don't even remember, but I can tell you that I had a hard time coming up with my topic too. And I ended up actually going through 3 different topics before I settled on the one that made sense to me. Okay. The one that I could actually do, that I could use my subject matter expertise, because if I were required to write a dissertation in accounting or marketing, I couldn't do it. I don't have enough expertise. So that's why I tell students, start from what you know, start from your area of expertise and go from there. And what I ended up doing was I ended up spending like 2 or 3 weeks reading through the literature. I mean, I was in IT, I was a software developer. I knew I wanted to be in that realm. So that's where I started, and I researched and researched and read and so on and so forth until finally I realized that there was a gap. Now, I didn't know, or I didn't realize that one of the ways that was easier for me to find a gap is to read those dissertations and read those articles, and down to the point where it says, you know, like, what are the limitations of the study? What are suggestions for future research?
Right,
And
that's a great
that would
place
have
to
helped
start.
me. But
We
I
have
didn't
the
know that.
video. Yeah, we have the
There's some hands
video.
out here in case
Yeah.
anybody hasn't noticed.
No, I see both your hands, both Marilyn and Seth. Let me see, David's
one in
first
the
in
video.
line. David, how do you know if the gap you have located is narrow enough? I have found myself continuing to question how narrow to truly go. I think that if you're looking for the gap, keep narrowing until you find studies with gaps that are interesting to you, and that's as narrow as you need to go. Because if you find a gap that you really like, or if you, meaning finding future research that you can really get on with and take further, and you're really excited about it, then that's narrow enough. Does that help, David?
Hi, yes, it does. So just for some context, my topic is looking at artificial intelligence, but specifically, how does an implementation of artificial intelligence in an organization affect the employees who are kind of there and seeing it happen, right? So
Yeah.
I found myself going, well, do I focus on anxiety? Does it raise levels of anxiety? But then that can go down another level to burnout,
Psychology. Yeah.
commitment, and how safe do I feel in my job? So it's always been, well, do I go down or can I stay up and use those touch points? Because I feel like you can always go another level, but how far can you or should you truly go?
I think you want to think in terms of business. Organizations are business is in the process of making money, right? I mean, for profit. So you want to take your AI research and see what doctoral studies you find that are at large. And then I think reading those will help you decide where you want to focus. Do you want to focus on its effect on profit, its effect on workers? For instance, Tesla just had a huge deal with their AI, right? And their issues with the videos that were playing in the cabins of their Tesla Model Ys and affecting their customer trust. So then you can also go down that side as well, because that still affects business and it still affects profit when it affects customer trust. Does that make sense?
It does, because I think the business problem is if we're going and business are saying this is efficient, it's efficient, it's efficient. Well, what if that efficiency that we're trying to stand up decreases efficiency in the workforce that we have right now? But then it's, well, how do I narrow down everything around that? But I think that
And I would search those topics: artificial intelligence, business organization, and workforce productivity. Maybe just kind of go down those roads and see what you find.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great question. Seth, I think you're next, then Marilyn. Did Seth
Yes,
go off?
good morning.
Hi.
My question is in relation to what you mentioned about the dissertations in business, specifically business entities. And so your comments has really thrown me off. And
Sorry.
I'm not sure of what direction to now head into.
What are you interested in?
Well, let me first start by saying that my background with my organization is in quality management,
Okay.
performance, efficiencies, production, and it's in a public sector, public service, federal government area.
Okay.
So this is not where I wanted to originally go, but this I think will be most applicable to be able to do a dissertation within a timely manner. And that potential title is The Effect of Retention on Organizational Performance in a Government Entity and its Relationship to Business.
I would just start there and search those topics and see what dissertations come up, and then kind of go down those roads and maybe back out government, put in government, put in a word, take out a word, isolate by the abstract like we showed you, and just kind of see where you go. Because if you can find, especially if it relates in a way to management or leadership, you can still tie it back to business because you're looking at how things are governed. So I think that you and your chair can potentially find a way to relate that in regards to leadership style or in regards to policy management.
So one element of what we do in my government entity is we are a self-supported
Hey,
agency.
are you listening to the discussion?
No, I was in the one with Tammy for the orientation one. I got to go this afternoon to do my part. Why? What's going on with that one?
No, well, I could be
You
wrong.
You
Yeah.
want to mute him? I don't know. There he goes. He's muted. Okay.
So
Sorry.
my agency is a self-supported agency. In other words, 90%, 97% of the funds we receive are because of applicants. So we have to look at things in a business environment. The other 3% is like E-Verify. That comes from the government. That's really not the primary focus of what we do. So when you said it has to be business, the only thing I did with what my title on here is I added and its relationship to business.
Seth, have you already looked for gaps?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so you're kind of ahead of the game. Have you already found a doctoral study with future recommendations that has questions and things that you like?
A few.
Yeah, I would say if you found that, why don't you run that when you do the pre-dissertation mentorship, just run that past your mentors and see how they direct you, because it sounds like you're pretty far ahead of the game. And so I would just have them take a look at that with you and see how they can apply it to business. Because when you're looking at, like I said, policy management and things like that, there might be a perfect way with the gaps that you found to make it work for you. So,
And in my particular case, we do studies all the time on 88 different offices.
okay.
In 16 different districts. And
Mhm.
so there's something coming up rather quickly that said, hey, we're having a performance issue. And as I go through the data
Mhm.
that I'm developing, or should I say that I'm obtaining from our systems, I see that this is potentially, using the word potentially, related to retention.
Yeah, and I would definitely say when you are doing that, Seth, I just want to make sure that when you find the gap, when you find the questions, you just don't want to have the complete made up mind until your chair and you sift through the gaps
Sure.
that you found. Because that way, if you're a little bit flexible and your chair works with you and your interests, you'll find the fastest way through.
Yeah, so I thought maybe I can use this as I'm already going through this in order to applying a lot of these similar type of dissertation elements to it.
Yeah, again, that's why you have a chair, because that's a beautiful thing about having a chair is that they help you navigate that.
So Trey's question kind of sparked my interest there too.
Good. Well, that's why we're here, right? Let me finish with Marilyn and then
I think I can make it quick.
thank you, Seth.
I think I can make it quick. HR is my background, and I'm semi-retired, and I'm actively involved in a volunteer organization that we have a budget. We do a lot of grants, and we have a budget of way over $1 million. So I want to, but since it's a volunteer organization, it's not profit. But personally, I have an MBA and a lot of business background. I think there are parallels that I can use for business and the DBA for business. Would you agree? Or should I forget about researching for volunteer organizations?
I think that I think first, sounds like an interesting topic. I just think that you need to go see what's out there in the gap studies and the doctoral studies so far to see how it ties in, because it's not that nonprofit can't give insight into leadership, because nonprofit and profit can have some of the same leadership styles. You just have to be careful because this is a DBA. So we are looking at the business world, and which is primarily not nonprofit. It is for profit.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but there are some overlapping, for instance, like leadership, If you're looking at leadership servant, let's say servant leadership, or maybe you're looking at corporate social responsibility, CSR, and you might
Again.
find something in both the nonprofit and the profit that give you insight. So I think it just depends on what you find and where your gaps are that you find and what kind of questions they ask. And do you want quantitative or qualitative? I mean,
Oh, no, quantitative.
okay. So quantitative analysis is looking at things in a different way, right? With correlations and relationships, right? So I think that's gonna, again, that's narrowing your where you're looking. And so again, I just try to encourage people. The problem that we see a great deal of the time is when someone has a made up mind before they've gone and seen what's out there. But having a general interest helps narrow your search, which is great. But before you have some people that I help, they literally have the title and the research questions, and they don't want to move from there.
Okay.
And the problem with that is it's a longer journey. I think, Dr. Burchell, am I saying this right? It's just a longer journey to get to the end.
It's hard to move a tree, isn't it?
But our goal is we certainly want you to move in a direction that you're interested in, because you're going to be doing this for a while. So, you don't want to be doing something that you're not interested in. We just want to help you. That's our goal, is to help you and support you. There's never a time in this dissertation process where we're trying to get you or trick you or trap you or stumble you or test you. We're only here to support you and to help you have a great journey, an interesting journey, and that gives you some tools to take you further in your career goals and in your learning goals. And so we're here to help. And that's one of the things I love about CSU. We are definitely here. That's our goal, to be relational, to care, and to help you as you become a peer, just like us, trying to further understanding.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
This is Dr. Walker. I want to ask a quick question. I think what I heard is you're saying that a dissertation can only be on a for-profit. So from government to, okay, I thought so. I thought I misunderstood you, because somebody had mentioned something about education, and you said they couldn't do it on nonprofit education.
No, I was saying to focus, just have a business focus. So if Trey, for instance, went down, I was just saying that in general for education, to look at the business side of it or the for-profit side of it, as opposed to public service. We're a business school. That's all. I just, again, that's you, Trey, in your chair. So
yeah, and so I was just going to add, I worked in the public sector in a high school for 6 years, and there's a tremendous number of problems that you can focus on there. I think somebody mentioned nonprofit.
Leadership, management style. Yeah.
There's tons of them out there. Absolutely. So I misheard. So I just wanted to add that, but that's awesome. But there's tons of problems. The thing about what's interesting, the thing about the for-profit and nonprofit, they all run on money. Even a nonprofit, they need money to operate, which means, and the thing about education is some people who are purists in education say, we're not a business, we're a service. And as somebody who's worked in that industry, it's not necessarily true, because if they don't have money, That's
why I said they have to follow a budget.
Yes, exactly.
I think I mentioned that with Trey. They still have a budget. I'm just talking about working with the chair to make sure that you have a business focus. So again, that's where I think I was mentioning with Marilyn, or I don't know who, but there is when you're looking at leadership style, management, things like that, you just want to make sure and be careful with your chair.
Yeah, I think somebody mentioned government and quality control. That's another great one too. I mean, you can do a perfect one on something like that too. And as somebody like myself who's worked in government for a long time, that would be great. So anyway, thanks so much.
I'm glad, Trey.
Thank
I'm
you.
glad that clarified it for you too. Thank you for helping clarify that. Well, thank you guys all so much. It was so great to see you all. Best of luck. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Dr. Whitaker. We'll see you soon. Okay. Next in line is Dr. Mary D., who is going to talk with us about Chapter 1. Dr. Mary D., are you here?
I am here, Dr. Burchell. Can I try and share my screen? Let me see if that'll work.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, I am sharing that and I want to now reset it to slideshow view. Can everybody see that?
Yes, absolutely.
Fantastic. Shall I just launch in?
Absolutely. Be sure to introduce yourself.
I will. I am Mary Dereshevsky, Mary D for short. My areas are research methods, statistics, and qualitative analysis. And it's a pleasure to be with you to give you a bird's eye view of chapter 1. We've all heard about the power of first impressions, haven't we? Did you know that research says we can form a first impression as quickly as 7 seconds? And that first impression will then form the foundation of our communications with the other party or parties, whether it's personal, professional, or both. And so you won't have to do chapter 1 in 7 seconds, but chapter 1 will be the first impression to certain key parts of your study. And that's what we'll talk about today. We'll step through them. The purpose of chapter 1, the introduction, is the first impression. Redundancy quite intended there. And it's going to preview for you why you're doing the study, the problem statement, what you are going to do, which is the purpose of the study, research questions and any hypotheses, how you are going to do it. And I know you will be talking more this afternoon with Dr. Burchell, Dr. Boyd. Dr. Burchell, I need a sound check here. Is it Dr. Wyke or Dr. Wiki? Dr. Wyke? Is that correct?
Yes, it's Dr. White.
Good. With a name like Dereshevsky, the last thing I want to do is offend anybody. And I do not want to do that. Trust me on that. And finally, the so what, as my own dissertation chair said, application and significance of the study. But so what do you do in the introduction? It's as varied as your own style. You could share a startling statistic, for example, and I'm just making up this one now. Did you know that 40% of first-year teachers in rural K-12 school districts leave the profession? So you're getting the reader's attention with a startling statistic. You might share a quote. You might share a first-person account. Imagine walking down the halls of a K-6 classroom and seeing the students not actively engaged in a math lesson, looking bored, looking frustrated, looking confused. You're piquing their interest with that first impression of the introduction. Now, the problem statement, just what it sounds like. It's a concern. It's why you are doing your study, just like the example I gave. It helps if you can cite a statistic. 40% of first-year K-12 teachers leave their rural school district after 1 year of teaching. And there may be a gap in information. It helps if you can, as qualitative researcher Michael Quinn Patton says, stand on the shoulders of giants and also say, well, Patton also said, and somebody else also said. There is a gap in information on this topic. So it informs why you are doing your study, to help illuminate that problem, solve that problem, and fill the information gap. Using words like need, we should, we must, very important and very helpful in terms of making your case for this problem statement. Now, the purpose statement, that is what you are going to do. The driving force, curiosity itself. Again, you'll be talking more this afternoon with Dr. Burchell, Dr. Boyd, and Dr. Wyke on how to formulate a purpose statement, because some of these sections that I'm just previewing for you now in chapter 1, you're going to be revisiting in much greater detail in chapter 3. But the purpose statement is, and here's kind of a general lead-in template. The purpose of the study is to do what? To explore, identify, understand something. These 3 words are particularly used with qualitative studies. You might be looking at a relationship, association, or prediction between something and some things, quantitative. You might be looking at a between group difference on something, quantitative. Impact or effect of something on something. Ideally, it's a single statement that says what you are going to do, what you are going to study. Now, I like to say to my students, it's just important to know what something is not as well as what it is. Here's a mistake that I sometimes see students make with the purpose statement. So I want to alert you to it. It's kind of a don't. Somebody might say, for example, the purpose of the study is to develop an intervention plan for first year teachers to and I just admitted somebody Dr. Rochelle, sorry, I'll let you do that. Somebody might somebody just muted me. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I hope everybody.
Yes,
all right.
I can hear you. I'm sorry. That was me. I accidentally clicked.
No worries. I thought maybe you didn't like my presentation. Maybe you were like, remember the gong show? Maybe you gonged me out of the room, but whatever. Whatever. Somebody might say, for example, the purpose of the study is to develop an intervention plan to retain first year K-12 rural teachers. Well, that's good, but that's actually how you're going to use the results of your study to make the world a better place. That is a benefit of your study. That's later. That comes in significance, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. So the purpose is what you are actually going to research. So I've given you some kind of template keywords that you will again be learning more about this afternoon. Now, research questions and hypotheses. In a quantitative study, you have both. You have both a research question and a testable hypotheses. But in qualitative studies, it's too soon. It's too early. You're not yet ready to test hypotheses statistically, which is the only way we test hypotheses. So you're only going to have an open-ended research question. Don't worry, I'll give you examples of both shortly. But I do want to say alignment, align, tight mapping. Alignment is very important in the concepts that you are looking at between the purpose, the research questions, and any quantitative hypotheses. So what do I mean? Let's look at a quantitative example. Purpose. The purpose of this study is to determine if there is a significant difference in average mathematics achievement score between third grade boys and girls in District X. See what I'm doing there? Purpose, declarative sentence from your writing fans, ends with a period. Significant between group difference. I am identifying what I want to do and look at. Now look at the research question. What is the difference, if any, in average mathematics achievement score between third grade boys and girls in District X? Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, and I've seen students do this, they remember an English teacher or a writing teacher saying, you're being redundant. You're being redundant. Don't use the same words. Don't use the same phrases. Forget that for now. I'm not criticizing your English teacher. Varying wording may be very valuable in a writing class, but here you want the exact same concept. See how almost identical it is, except a nod to your English teacher. This one is an interrogative sentence. It ends with a question mark, but it's the same concepts. Third grade boys and girls, District X, average math achievement score. Now let's look at the hypotheses. They tend to come in pairs. The null is what I call the pessimistic one, none of something. There will not be a significant difference in average mathematics achievement score between third grade boys and girls in District X. The pessimistic one, none of. We start out believing the null, unless there's compelling evidence, significant evidence, which we'll talk about this afternoon, to reject that null in favor of, look at the alternative hypothesis. There will be a significant difference in average mathematics achievement score between third grade boys and girls in District X. See how almost identical, virtually identical, same concepts across purpose, research question, Null hypothesis, none of something, alternative hypothesis, there is something going on. Now let's look at a qualitative example. As I mentioned, in qualitative, we're not yet ready to do statistical testing. We're still finding out. We're still building a foundation of knowledge. Purpose. The purpose of the study is to understand the primary reasons for first-year teacher retention in a rural K-12 school district. See how that identifies? I've used the word understand, which we'll talk about this afternoon. Dr. Burchell is our expert in qualitative research, but I've said what I want to find out about. Research question. What are the primary reasons for first-year teacher retention in a rural K-12 school district? Again, virtually identical wording, no hypotheses yet. I'm still building knowledge in words. So I hope those examples were helpful to you, kind of to preview what you'll talk about more this afternoon. Now, next section of chapter 1, theory, advancing theoretical knowledge. What is a theory? A theory is what we think we know so far about some construct that we are interested in exploring or studying further in our study. Why do I say what we think we know? Well, first, let me tell you why it's been there for a while. It's kind of a long-standing explanation that some researchers have developed. It can be modified based on current research on that theory, but it can never be absolutely proven. So what do I mean by a theory? What is a theory? I've given you a couple of examples here. If you're studying any aspect of adult learning, you're probably going to want to cite Malcolm Knowles' theory of andragogy, how adults learn. If you're studying motivation, there can be, and this is a great example, there can be more than one theory in the literature, more than one explanatory model. Maslow, Vroom, McClelland, and those are just 3 examples of theories of motivation. What you want to do in this section of chapter 1, you want to cite the original authors or theorists and the years of origin or development of each theory. I sometimes see students talking about, if they might be talking about motivation, they might be citing only current researchers, but I will say to them, yeah, but who developed that explanation? Was it Maslow? Was it Broom? Was it McClelland? What year was it developed? Again, with the understanding, all of these have ended up being modified in some ways based on current researchers continuing to work with that explanatory model. But you do want to cite the original authors or theorists and the years of origin or development. Application to business administration, just what it sounds like. How can a professional practitioner put your results to work? What would a product manager know, do, or understand better based on your study? How can they apply it? You know, I like to say, if you were going to give a 1-hour in-service to professional practitioners, first-year IT, middle managers, project managers, leaders, how would you put those results directly to work based on the results of your study? Now, significance, remember what I said, what not to do when you are formulating your study purpose. Now we talk about the so what, as my own dissertation chair said. Think ahead. I know you haven't done your study yet in chapter 1, but you probably have a pretty good idea who's going to be better off and how as a result of your study. What is the overall value, the benefits, the beneficiaries, and the contributions of your study. And in order to think ahead like that, who's going to be better off, you want to think about an idea called key stakeholders. Who are the key stakeholders of your study? And what do you expect them? Remember, it's just a prediction at this point. You haven't done your study yet, but you can pretty confidently forecast who's going to be better off and how. You want to make will statements. Here's an example of 3 key stakeholders. Customers will know, do, or understand what based on what I expect to learn from my study. What will investors know, do, or understand better? What will creditors know, do, or understand better. So that's an example of looking ahead, looking ahead. How do I expect the world to be a better place as a result of what I learned from my study? And what do I specifically think the beneficiaries, the key stakeholders will know, do, or understand better? Make those, when you're making those will statements, you know you're on the right track there. Methodology and design, again, you will learn much more about this from Drs. Burchell, Boyd, and Weick this afternoon. But I'm going to reference quickly a mistake I sometimes see students make. I want to distinguish between methodology and design just a little bit. There are only 3 methodologies. It's like 3 trees. Think of 3 trees in your backyard or in the forest or in a public park. And they are quantitative, qualitative, and mixed methods. But just like each tree has branches hanging off it, each of these 3 methodology trees has designs hanging off it as its branches. Let me tell you the mistake. I'll give you an example of the mistake I sometimes see. Sometimes students will write and say, I'm using a case study methodology. No, case study is a design, it's a branch, but which tree is it on? Very likely the qualitative branch. So there are only 3 methodologies, but each of these 3 trees has designs associated with it, quantitative, qualitative, and mixed methods that you will hear more about this afternoon. But that's the distinction I want you to get, what to do and what not to do between methodology and design, which you introduce very briefly in chapter 1. Another example, I'm using a quantitative methodology, and it is a correlational design because I am looking for a relationship numerically between motivation and satisfaction of first-year middle managers in the packaging industry. There you go. Quantitative methodology, correlational design. Why? Relationship between 2 variables measured numerically. You briefly introduce it in chapter 1. Definition of terms, very important. You want to go back to your, remember, align, study purpose. What are you studying and your purpose of the study? And you want to provide a defensible, rigorous, credible operational definition of each of those terms. For example, motivation, satisfaction, perceptions. If that's in your purpose statement, if that's in your research question, if that's in your hypotheses, you want to provide a good definition. What not to do, you don't want to use Wikipedia, not very credible. Anybody can go in and hack those definitions. Not even a popular dictionary. Merriam-Webster is okay, but not so much for a scholarly study. You want to, for example, cite the theorists, motivation, Maslow or McClelland. It's okay to use a specialized dictionary of psychological terms, but you want to make sure you define every one of those constructs. Assumptions, they're the givens. They are what you just, I hate to be redundant, what you assume to be true. For example, interview subjects will provide truthful answers. If you're doing a quantitative study, which Dr. Weick will talk with you more about, and maybe Dr. Boyd, every statistic has with it certain assumptions, like normality of distribution, like equality of subgroup variances. I know I'm throwing out terms here that you'll learn more about, but those are what you list in assumptions. Limitations, I like to say, things may have happened, but not necessarily for the reasons I think they did. There could be confounding variables that were the true hidden causes of what you think you are observing or measuring. For example, survey non-response bias. Consider yourself very lucky if you hit your desired survey response rate on your very first try. Just doesn't happen very often. So here's the danger that you want to talk about in limitations. Could your non-respondents, you may have 10% didn't respond, 20% didn't fill out your survey, even 30%. But here's the danger, that your non-respondents might differ systematically from your respondents on your variables of interest. What do I mean by that? Let me tell you what I don't mean. If they differ on their favorite flavor of ice cream, I mean, That's nice, but unless you're doing a study on preferences and perceptions about ice cream flavors, that doesn't matter. But if you are doing a study on perceptions, motivations, satisfaction, and the non-respondents may differ in satisfaction with the benefits their company offers. Well, that's a danger. Why didn't they answer? Were they afraid to? Were they holding back for some reason? So that's the danger, and that's what you have to disclose in your limitations. Example of a qualitative study, subconscious researcher bias. Dr. Burchell will be talking with you about qualitative studies, and there's a phrase called researcher as instrument. We can't help but wear two hats. And qualitative researcher, we're human beings in addition to researchers, and we bring with us our experiences, our perceptions, our values, and we might accidentally be pre-biased, hoping the results will turn out a certain way. Now, again, there are things you can do to reduce or mitigate, like bracketing. You'll be talking about that, I'm sure, this afternoon. But you have to disclose. You have to disclose. It's like the warning labels on packs of cigarettes, I guess. That's what you disclose in limitations. Some things that could accidentally torpedo the credibility of your study findings. Things may happen for reasons other than you think. Delimitations, you heard of the country song, Don't Fence Me In. They're the boundary conditions of your study. Every study is bounded. So you have to kind of disclose. Let me jump right to the example. I know time is running a little bit short. Let me show you an example of how you would literally state a delimitation. The study was conducted with public school fourth graders in an urban southeastern school district. Therefore, the findings and results may not necessarily generalize to other subjects, locations, or future time periods. They are the conditions under which you did your study, and I should have even included in there during the 2023 academic year. It's with whom you did your study, where you did your study, and when, the time period or duration. And it's a gentle warning that maybe even in the same place, things might turn out differently for this urban southeastern school district with fourth graders if I do the study next year. So they have to do with external validity, generalizability, delimitations, the boundaries, the fences. And finally, you sum up in chapter 1. Remember the classic phrase from, if you've taken a journalism class, tell them what you just told them. You're connecting, you're bridging, sort of like I'm bridging to what Dr. Gualco will be talking with you about shortly in chapter 2. You restate what you just talked about in chapter 1, the problem, hit the key sections. I know we talked about a lot, the problem, the purpose, maybe the significance, what you talked about in detail, and now bridge to the upcoming detailed literature review in chapter 2. It's literally a summary. So I mentioned first impressions and how they build the foundation of your study when we began my presentation on chapter 1. So in closing, I would like to say, I believe every single one of you listening to this presentation today is going to do what Robert Cheek has said, go out of your way to make an outstanding first impression. Thank you for listening. I hope this was useful to you. I see I'm looking at my watch, all of 3 minutes. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Marilyn, thank you. I'm seeing yours. I hope that was helpful. I am glad. I am scrolling up. Dr. Burchell is correct. If you can justify your decision with your chair, then you are gold. Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other questions? Any comments? You know how
Thank
they
you very
say
much.
with Dr. Burchell, before I kick it back to you, I can't resist one more education example. You know how they say with preschoolers, it's dangerous when they're too noisy, but it's also dangerous when they're too quiet. So I hope that's not a bad sign. But anyway, Dr. Burchell, I'll kick it back to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mary D. That's why I call you Mary D, because I can't. I
love it. I love it. I love it.
That's why
You know what, Dr. Burchell? It's like Elvis or Cher, you know, you're famous when they reduce your name down like that. So that's a good sign.
That's right. Okay, thank you again. Next on our list is Dr. Gualco, who is going to be talking about Chapter 2, the Lit Review. And then after that, we'll have lunch. Quickly, though, before I turn it over to Dr. Gualco, I see two people in my list that I don't have an email for. And I know Dr. Jafke wants to reach out to you. So if you are Kelly Witherspoon or Sherian Mercy, can you just send me your email address? Oh, okay, very good. Okay, and Kelly Witherspoon as well. Thank you very much. Okay, Dr. Gualco, be sure that you introduce yourself and take it away.
Hey, thanks. Can everybody hear me and see my screen? It says Chapter 2. Everybody got it? Awesome. My name is Dean Gualco. So I've been here, I think, about 8 years, something like that, a long time. Really enjoy it. I've taught for 25 years. Also taught 6 years in a high school, not full-time, but taught in high school, taught a college course in a high school. 25 years as an HR director for 2 California cities for the University of California and also for the governor of California and a JPA. And I'm writing my 11th book as we speak. So when we talk about research and the literature review, I think I already have 6 pages worth of citations. So I enjoy the process. I enjoy research. I enjoy writing. I enjoy everything that you all are doing. So hopefully for some of you out there, this isn't the first foray into writing something of significance, that this will be one of many articles or books that you're going to write on your subject matter. The great thing about a dissertation is, and it's really exciting, by the way, today should be an exciting day because you're actually adding something to your literature. In all other aspects of your education, you're a consumer, which means you're reading and you're stating back to somebody what you read. Here, you're actually writing something that somebody else is going to read and they're going to use to advance their own knowledge. So it really is such a seminal event in your educational career, but it's also the time that you can actually give something back to the people who come after you. So I want you to keep that in mind as we go through this. It's so much of what we do today is do this and do that. We try not to do it that way because we really want you to enjoy the process and also to understand why you're doing it. So with that as a bit background, I'm doing Chapter 2. For those who just finished Chapter 1, this is where you can kind of take a breath. I hesitate to say this is an easier chapter. For me, it was easier because it's really a research-based process. And in Chapter 1, it's very formulaic. You have to hit each one of those headings. Here, you kind of create your own headings under general guidelines. So, and it allows you a bit more flexibility in the information that you gather and how you present it. Again, I just think it's a bit more fun for anybody who likes researching. For those explorers out there, this is the exploration chapter. So what is a lit review? It's a word we use that has such, I think, draconian connotations to it, and we don't mean it to be, but it's really your research. It's really what you rely upon in order to provide, I'll call it the foundation of your work. The overall intent here is to see what information is out there related to your subject. I heard the terms gap research earlier. This is where you're going to include that information. So if you're going to be talking about motivation in this chapter, you're going to present what you know and what you've learned about motivation. If you're going to talk about a certain theory and then you're going to revise a theory or create a new theory, the background information goes in here. This tells your audience, this is everything that I know about this subject, and it also identifies what is not known. Because obviously, if you haven't included it in your literature review, then it's not known. At least that's the hope. What maybe the cardinal sin, so to speak, of a lit review is you left something out. And so let's say you wrote a dissertation and then somebody reads your dissertation and says, you know, Bob, didn't you see this study 2 years ago and they concluded this? And you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't see that. That's what we're trying to avoid in the lit review. It is a canvas upon which every color of the paint has been included. So we want to make sure that we do the totality of our research and we leave nothing left to chance. So, as we say here, it details what other researchers and experts and theorists have opined on the subject. Isn't that a great sentence? It's a great sentence. Let me just tell you what a theory is, by the way. A theory is somebody's idea. So we place great weight in theories if we should place great weight in theories. But I could have a theory that says, you know, my theory is A, B, and C, and everybody's like, that's just not a good theory. But it's called a theory, so it makes it sound great. Just remember, just because somebody has created a theory doesn't mean it's a good one. So we have two goals, by the way, to include all research on your subject so that you can identify the gap. We talked about that earlier, right? The gap. And second, we want to be a recognized expert. The great thing about your dissertation, everybody, is at the end of it, you are going to be the expert. Dissertations are so segmented, so narrow in focus that your chair, like myself, Dr. Pichel, are not going to really know the intricacies of what you're studying. Some people say, does that mean you can pull one over on your chair? In some ways, yes. I say that very liberally, but the point is you're studying everything in this subject. So you are the recognized expert. By the way, we really wouldn't let you do a dissertation if it wasn't new and unique. You don't do a dissertation on something that somebody did last year. So again, that showcases that you're becoming the necessary expert. When I did my dissertation 20-something years ago, almost 30 years ago, mine was on regional campuses of colleges. And at that time, they're common now. At that time, there really wasn't regional campuses, the Ohio State opening a campus in another city or state. Now it's much more common, but at the time, we really didn't have that. So mine was specific on kind of like, I'm generalizing, but how do you open or what are some of the particulars of a regional campus at a university? You couldn't do that dissertation today because it's so common, but back in the day, you could. By the way, let me just stop for a second. Usually we wait to the end. Anybody have any questions? Any apprehensions, trepidations, anything yet? We're all good? You do know, by the way, that you usually have to wait 7 seconds before anybody asks a question. So just so you know, I waited 7 seconds. That's a true statement, by the way. Most people are too nervous the first 7 seconds. But anyway, interrupt me if you have any questions. You are not going to throw me. So just let me know. All right, key components. These are the numbers. We use numbers as guidelines. So don't let them intimidate you that you have to have this or that. They're guidelines. So chapter 2, we look for at least 25 pages. Can it be less? Absolutely. Can it be more? Often it is. Mine was. It often depends sometimes what type of study you're doing, of course. But in general, you look about 25 pages. The reason why you're going to have so many pages is because you're looking at the totality of a subject. If yours is on motivation or retention, you're going to have to talk about it from a national viewpoint, an industry viewpoint, a business viewpoint. You can see how you can really have quite a bit of materials in there to completely and comprehensively talk about a subject. You have about 50 references. It's not too many. It's only about 2 per page when you look at it. That's really not too many. Some people will say, does that mean 50 times you have a reference or 50 different references? Obviously, you don't want to have one reference 50 times, obviously. But maybe somebody has 2 or 3 things in there that could happen. But you again want to make sure that you showcase to your audience that you completely and comprehensively address the issue. That usually takes quite a bit of references. By the way, let me just say too, some of these references may not be good. It could be a bad reference. It could be a reference that you should utilize, but maybe it's a discredited reference. You still want to include it if it's germane to your topic. Does that make sense? You can, if you're trying to show that maybe a study 4 years ago or 10 years ago. And I'll give you a good example. The remote workplace has completely upended many of the aspects that we found were truisms in the workplace. Teams and communications have really been rocked by this move towards remote workplace. You could have studies 5 years ago that talks about the virtues of team workplaces and how it must, and I think Dr. Burchell used the word must, or somebody did, and they're concluding you've got to have this. Well, now we're realizing not so much. That's a reference that you can include. It may have been appropriate at the time, today, not so much. But it does show that you've comprehensively researched that subject matter. You went 75% in the last 5 years. Some people will say, why? Why do you have to have that? Well, I have some from 6, 7, 8. It's a bit loose on the 75% in the last 5 years. However, here's the danger. If you have a reference of 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago, you run the danger that there could be a new reference that you're missing. The closer you get to when you do your reference, it's more difficult to have a study after that that you didn't get. Sometimes when we talk about dissertations, I don't want to say scare you, or you get scared. It's like, you got to do this, and you got to do this, and you got to do this. What people like Dr. Burchell and I like to do is to give you the whys. There's whys that you do it. Not just don't do it and you must do it. Here's why. This is why you need 25 pages. This is why you need 50 references. Here's why we'd like to see references 75% in the last 5 years. And that way you can kind of go, oh, I get it now. That makes sense. And so that's what we're trying to do. We want to synthesize. I think what I want to really highlight here, and you guys have all access to this, right? They have access to our PowerPoints, right? Dr. Burchell, they do, right?
They don't have them at the moment, but I'm going to send them out today.
Okay.
Or tomorrow after this is over.
Perfect. So the reason I say that is whenever we do a PowerPoint, I don't read everything on here, but you can have the PowerPoint and look at it after. So don't feel like you have to remember everything. But if I'm not talking about something, that's just because I know you're going to get PowerPoint. What you also want to do, and I want to highlight here, is we really don't like quotes. So we try to paraphrase as much as we can. Quoting, direct quotes, is the easy way. But that doesn't mean it's the learned way. The way you learn something is to take information and paraphrase it in your own words, maybe better words. Remember, you cite the source of the thought, because in citing, we always cite the thought. If you directly quote the thought, it's still a cite. But if you summarize the thought or the idea, you still have to cite because it's not your thought. You've paraphrased it from somebody else, but it's not your thought. So the last line is really important. The topics typically start with a wide look that narrows down to the gap that you're researching. I often use the visual of a funnel like this. You start broad and you go narrow. And the easiest one, as I mentioned, is maybe you're looking at an issue. You're looking at, I have a student now who's doing one on boat dealers in the Gulf Coast. And so he's starting first with, it happens to do with software, I'll just use it. And so he talks about the software used nationally. And then he's talking about the software used within the boat industry. And then he's talking about the software used in the boat industry in the Gulf Coast area. So you see how you start nationally and then you narrow down, because using the software in the Gulf Coast may be different than using that software in, for instance, California. I live in California. We all know California is different, right? So it could be different there. So you want to make sure, but that's how easy it is to narrow it down. And that's why it's fairly easy to get 25 pages. But there's a good example, and your chair will help you with this. But you can also see that you really want to start globally retention. If you're looking at retention within fourth grade teachers, then you're going to start first with what is the retention in education, K through 12. And then you can talk about what's retention nationally in fourth grade. And then you keep narrowing it down so that you can finally get to, and people will say, again, the hows, right? I had somebody who says, oh, the retention's out of control in this area. And I said, oh, it really is. And they go, yeah, it's 14%. And I go, oh, okay. Well, then when they started to do their research, they realized that 14% isn't out of control. Nationally, the figure is higher. So we had to go back and say, you really don't have a problem here because 14% is actually pretty good. And they're saying, well, that's really bad. I thought it was bad. And it's like, well, compared to everything. And here's what we're trying to prevent you. Again, the how and the why. We don't want you to do a dissertation and you present it and you get in front of a conference and you say, it's 14% and it's just horrible. And somebody raised their hand and said, but nationally it's 39%. You guys are doing great. Why would you do a dissertation that says it's bad when nationally, or you're half the national rate? And then you stand up there and you go, oh, that's right. That's what we're trying to prevent, right? Okay, next. It's not an annotated bibliography. It's not a list of unrelated sources. It's not a summary of sources. That's why we avoid copying and pasting. As it says here, try to paraphrase and summarize. We support with the citation, which is exactly what we do with paraphrasing. We don't put any opinions or subjective statements. This is very difficult. It's very difficult in writing, but the dissertation, for the most part, is not your point of view. It's a research study. And I use that word broadly. You're researching an instance, a phenomena, something that you think, and I use this word very loosely, you think you can fix. You think that you can correct. In dissertations, we don't fix or correct or solve anything for the most part, but I use those words kind of liberally. That's what we're hoping to do. And so we don't want to say, and I give you the example I use a lot. Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. This is not a political statement. If I was to get up in front of you and say, here is my way to have peace in this area, you all would look at me and say, who are you, Dean? Why am I listening to you? You know nothing about it. But if Hillary Clinton got up here and says, based on my experiences and serving as Secretary of State, these are the 3 strategies I think we should do to have peace in blank, you would probably sit there and go, okay, she knows what she's talking about. If you in a dissertation was to say, here's the problem in the Department of Transportation or with IBM, and here is how I would solve it, some people would look at you and I and say, well, what do you know about IBM? So you have to prove it with the research that you're doing. That's why we don't want any opinions or subjective statements. Easiest way to write, of course, is through the CSU template. I often tell people, we all often tell people, take the template and type right over it. It's almost impossible not to follow the right formatting if you start with the template and just write right over it, type right over it. I always tell people when they start college, take the template. Don't even worry about page numbers or titles, just type right over it. You don't even have to measure anything. Easy peasy, as they used to say. All right, key concepts. We group it into themes. Remember when I was talking about national and then maybe state and then local? Those are themes, some types of themes. It doesn't have to be regional, of course. It could be the themes of, if you're working on some variables, for instance, retention, or I don't like to use the word morale, but if you're looking at that, then it could be certain themes about it. Morale within this industry, that industry, nationally, whatever it may be. Those are the themes. You typically have 2 to 4 themes. I typically see 4. Maybe your chairs will see a bit different, but I usually like to see 4, and some of it is more background. And then usually the last one is something like what's been done about this issue so far. And that allows you or prevents you from seeing a study that maybe somebody else has done and you're doing the exact same thing. We talked about the wider, broader. The concept you may want to use is the funnel, which again, I told you about that. Here's the example here. You have high school achievement internationally, then the US, then in Maine, that kind of thing. Another example is consequence, cost, impact of turnover. So you look at turnover in the US, turnover, this is one I actually did. This wasn't my dissertation, I told you about mine. This was somebody else who I worked with. They looked at turnover, they looked at turnover in the US, turnover rates of property managers in Texas, and then promising strategies to reducing. for that. Scholarly, reputable, peer-reviewed sources. Let me just make it kind of a quick comment. Work with your chair about sources. You may find sources that may not necessarily fall in this area, and your chair can make a decision on whether you can include that or not. You obviously can't include sites from the National Enquirer or the Globe. Obviously, I'm being facetious, but there may be an interview that was done by someone who's highly reputable within the industry, and they made comments that you find quite advantageous to your study, and you may want to try to use those. Talk to your chair, and there's some things like that can be used. I often tell people there's many over the years peer-reviewed articles that have later been discredited. So just because it's been peer-reviewed doesn't mean that the information is irrefutable for eternity. There's many articles that have found to be not applicable today, especially with some of the upended business environments that we have. It's not just, you guys are doing this, by the way, at a perfect time. I tell people it's not just the remote workplace that has upended our world, but we're now grappling with robots and artificial intelligence. And so some, if not many, of the issues about how to manage a workplace are not as applicable today as they were even 5 years ago, because of the dramatic increase of and the influence of AI and robotics. There's a study out that 8 out of every 10 positions that are eliminated are because we don't need humans anymore. So when we talk about you have to work together and communicate and all that stuff, is that really as prevalent today as it was 5 years ago? That's a great study, right? Lots of stuff out there. Okay. What facets to consider when gathering data? You want to make an informed recommendation, of course. You want to compile the research, of course. And then, I always like to say this, detail any data or information that's unavailable or key concepts where data is unproven. There was a guy who said one time, I think he was Secretary of Defense, he says there's known unknowns and unknown unknowns or something like that. In other words, he said, there's information we wish we had, but it's not available. There's nothing wrong with stating, the following of information, this information is unavailable, and had it been available, it may change some of the conclusions. So there's just some information that you just can't get. It's not compiled, and you wish you had it. But by stating that kind of information, you're at least telling your audience, I'm thinking about that, but I just don't have the information. It's not that I didn't get it, it's just that it's not available. Okay. And a couple things, last thing really, well, there's one more slide, but remember about the meal concept, which is your main idea when presenting your research study. In your own words, by the way, it's not saying it's just that you're paraphrasing. Your evidence that supports it, and any kind of analysis that you need from literature, and then you lead into the next paragraph or a chapter. This is kind of a good way. Some people follow it, some don't. I have no problem telling you, I don't really follow it. It's a good thing to follow, but maybe I do it subconsciously, but I don't actually think of a meal thing. But it may be good to actually have it out there for some people. Of the most important, though, for me is evidence. People may debate or challenge your interpretation, but if you have the best evidence, it's very difficult to do that. Evidence is really key. The structure. I hear from quite a few people that, hold on for a second, sorry. I live behind a gate and somebody's trying to get in the gate. Sorry. The structure of a literature review, I hear some people say sometimes introductions. I do an introduction every section and a conclusion every section. That is true, but really it's like a movie. If you think about the 5 chapters as movies, when you go from episode to episode, don't they often tell you what you remember the last episode? Now, if you read it all at one time, it's probably a bit less important. But if you're going to go into each section, especially a section that is comprehensively different than the previous one, you kind of want to have a little bit of a lead in. And then at the very end of it, when you write 25 pages, which is just our summary, you want to make sure that you state to your audience what you want them to remember. I talk about this a lot, maybe because it's on my mind. I told you I'm writing this book now, and it's going to be, a lengthy one, and probably a bit longer than your dissertation. What's interesting is when you go to publish it, the publisher wants 1, maybe 2 paragraphs of what that whole book is about. And I remember one of my books was like 300 something pages, and to come up with 1 or 2 paragraphs of what they want you to know to sell the book can be so daunting. And it's the same, when you go on Amazon, pull up any book on Amazon, there's one sentence that tells you kind of what the book's about. You just wrote 300 pages. That's what we're doing here. If you think about it that way in your summary, maybe the most important thing is that summary paragraph. And I often tell people, if somebody only reads your summary, it should tell them everything that they need to know about what the work you did. If they want to go get evidence of it, they would read your 25 pages or 50 pages or whatever it is. But if they want to get the most important message that you want them to learn from what you have just written, it's got to be in that summary. As far as the lead into the next chapter, chapter 3, it's very short. In the next chapter, we will this will be further discussed in the next, these aspects including would be further discussed. So it doesn't take much time or effort to do it. So we talked a little bit about that. Key points, I talked about this a lot. I just have a couple minutes, but write first, edit later. Hardest thing to do. Everybody wants to edit. Can't tell you how many times I've worked with students and they want to edit as they go. And the problem is that they end up changing some of the stuff they did earlier. And I tell them, you spent hours or days making that paragraph or that page perfect, and then we've eliminated because it doesn't work. Don't do that, right? I just had somebody who did their first 3 chapters. They didn't edit any of it. Probably not the best. Some people like to kind of at least edit as they go, but I want them to get the thoughts in there, and then we can always comprehensively edit it. Work with your chairs. Some chairs have different processes, but the point is, don't spend too much time early on making the words in the sentence perfect, because you may find yourself having to eliminate some of that. We talked about broadly. We talked about search for something that hasn't been done, the missing aspects. I think we've got that down. And then at the time that you finish chapter 2, your researcher has presented the information that they think they want you to learn, and the reader has a comprehensive understanding of the issue. Questions? I would love to hear from any of you on maybe the most fun chapter. I like chapter 4 too, by the way, or chapter 5. I think that's pretty fun. But anybody have any thoughts or questions that I can help you with? And hopefully I have demystified or reduced any apprehensions you have about this chapter.
I had one question, and that is, you mentioned about peer-reviewed articles and that sometimes later they're found not to be accurate. So no notation is included then later on to let people know that it's been found not to be reliable?
Well, you may find out in your research that you're going to discredit somebody else's theory of 10 years ago. So no one's going to go back to when it was, but you could find out in your studies that maybe that researcher was wrong. Or because the environment changed, because the circumstances that they relied upon to create that theory no longer exist or have been changed, that their theory is not as important as it was 10 years ago. By the way, that's an exciting thing. I tell people all the time, we have hundreds of books on management. I wrote one. We have hundreds of books of leadership. And I tell people, well, if there was one true way to do it and it was never controversial or contentious, no one would write another book about leadership. It's been done. But there is so many aspects of leadership and variances of it that necessitate having a new book published. And there's people that come out and say that, you know, David wasn't right. And here's why he wasn't right. And I'm going to convince you, I'm writing this paper in this book to tell you why David is not right. And David will probably come back and say, you know, Dean's not right. But, and that's okay. The point is, that's why we're doing this. Motivation is not a settled topic. Leadership is not a settled topic. And so we're doing research to either add to or to discredit, you know, all of that. That's why we do this research.
Which I suppose speaks to why we want to use more current articles and stuff, maybe. Okay.
If it's not, you can have an article 10 years ago, and that's still seen as the seminal piece of art on that subject. Nothing since then has cast any dispersions on that article. Perfectly fine to use that, by the way. Absolutely perfectly fine. You know, I was, you know, it's settled research or something. But now maybe it's not with the particulars of the day. And there's nothing that's been here since 10 years. So can you use that? And is that a topic of your dissertation and everything's 10 years old? You have to make the case, but I think you can perfectly do that. I mean, I often tell people is if you don't have any research on your study in the last 5 years, maybe no one studied it. That doesn't mean it's a bad study, but you're going to have to make the case that there is no research on it. And then you're challenging your audience. Then you go out there and find research that you say I'm not including, right?
Okay.
So when you do your literature review, what you're saying is I've researched every aspect of this study and I'm not missing a thing. So if the research you have is dated, you know, you can take, I don't want to go too far with this, but you could take something that's 20 years old and no one's ever picked it up again. And you can say, I just think this is wrong. And no one's calling it as wrong. I mean, medicine is a great example. How many times have we had medicine that we think works and then 5 years later it doesn't? Or, you know, that's a great example of just because someone published it and it worked at one time, doesn't mean it's going to work in 10 years. Okay. So don't hold on that 5-year thing, but make sure there's nothing in the last 5 years if you're going back 10.
Thank you.
Yeah. Right. Let me just say
Very
one
good.
let me just say one thing that we use this funnel. So some people say, well, there's nothing in the last 10 years. My literature review is very short. Not really, because remember, you're still going to go very, very broad. Maybe in that specific subject, there's nothing there, but you're going to start, you're going to do medicine. You're going to talk about medicine. You're going to talk about hearts or whatever it is, but maybe there's nothing at the key thing that you want, but you're still going to have quite a bit from up there. Okay. I talk too much. I know, Dr. Michelle. Okay. But if you want me to answer
Don't we all?
anything, no. Yeah.
David has a question for you.
Okay.
Hey, Dr. Kowalka, this is David Sterritt. I have a question pertaining to the broadness and the narrow funnel balancing act within Chapter 2. So how do you know if you've reached too far, you've spent too much time seeking something broad? Because for me, with the AI and kind of what's the impact on the employee, when I was speaking with someone else at my company that did a DBA, they said, oh, well, maybe you can look at what the impact was when offshoring was a big thing and jobs were outsourcing overseas. And I didn't even think about it because it was totally different side. So how far is too far to reach or too long to spend trying to look for something that's similar, but it's not exactly the topic that you have?
You know, my first thought is that's such an easy question for me to answer because it really is. But it's hard, I think, for students. And I was a student. We've all been students at one time. You know, I hate to say, here's the best piece of advice I ever give you. The best piece is always write first, edit later. That's always the best. Probably the second best piece of advice I would give any student from starting undergraduate to dissertation is ask. I have seen so many students, I teach a lot of first class undergraduates, even high school, and they're not sure what they want to do. Maybe they're shy or embarrassed of asking a faculty member or a dissertation chair. And so they're just start going and researching and writing. And then finally, they get so frustrated and they start to hate the class and hate the process. And then they call their teacher and the teacher's like, you can't use any of that. And then they're like, well, I just spent hours on it. And yeah, you can't use any of it. And we can say it nicely, but the point is, had you asked your faculty member in literally a minute or two, we could have told you which way to go. By the way, it does not mean that we're smart. It just means that we've done it before. There's a great Chinese saying that says a 70-year-old man can learn from a 71-year-old man. We have made the mistakes that we're trying to prevent you from doing yourself. We have spent hours on something that had we just asked a question, we would have realized, don't do any of it. So as far as that, how do we know how far we're going? You talk to your faculty member. If you don't have a chair, you talk to your chair and you say, hey, is this too broad? And then and we do this for a living. We're going to sit there and go, nope, these are going to be your things, or this is what you're going to be thinking. And we'll put you on the right track. Just if you find yourself, and it's not that you're a pain or you're going to interrupt us all the time. I sent a note to another faculty member. I don't know if she's on here. And I actually put on there, I go, I can't believe you haven't blocked me yet. Because I ask a lot of questions, right? And she's very nice. She's super nice. She hasn't blocked me yet. But the point is that I'm asking because for me to research it would have been hours, and maybe I wouldn't have got the right answer. And I know she has the right answer. So we are very much collegiate. Dr. Michelle, I should see her here. I ask her questions often, and she's very generous with her time, and she hasn't told me to stop asking. But she's an expert in many of the areas I'm not. And, I'm pretty good, but I'm not as good as she is in some of these areas. So I ask, and it saves me so much time. And here's the kicker. I enjoy it more. I don't have to waste hours when I could have just picked up the phone and say, hey, what do you think here? So that's what I would suggest you ask. Don't even ponder it, ask, and they will help you with it. It'll save you time and you'll enjoy it. Hope that helps.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Gualco. To add to that, I want to say that never did I learn the fact that none of us know everything until I got my PhD. If somebody acts like they know everything, they don't. They're compensating somehow because there's no way. And I don't want to know everything either. So, I'm good with asking people about things I don't know about. I'm very good with that. Again, thank you, Dr. Gualco, for your insightful presentation. It's time to go to lunch now. I did want to quickly say that after lunch, I'll be covering chapter 3, and then Dr. Boyd will be covering qualitative methodology and design. Dr. White will be covering quantitative. Then we'll have the IRB, chapter 4, chapter 5, and the oral defense. So I highly suggest that you try and attend this afternoon. And I also want to say, if you can't attend this afternoon, attend the next one, because this is valuable information that will help you get through your process and your dissertation faster. Okay, so we'll meet right back here at about 5 after 1 Central, 5 after 2 Eastern. Okay, just stay here and we'll see you in 45 minutes. Thank you.